So welcome to the Plodcast. This is episode 110, I believe. Episode 110, Plodcast. Here you are. If you came looking for the Plodcast, you came to the right place. So as I'm recording this, we are coming up on next month the what has been termed by some as the hard Brexit. Theresa May, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was never really a Brexit fan, but the British public had voted to leave the European Union, and she was not a fan, not a believer, and so she tried to implement a Brexit that would arrange for a soft landing. Basically, that soft landing would be working something out with the EU that everybody would be kind of sort of happy with, which is to say, the British electorate would not be happy with. In other words, the established bureaucrats, the established Eurocrats, the established people who had burrowed into the woodwork of all the positions of power in modern Europe are only going to be happy if the people whose lives they are running are unhappy, and it's getting to the point where vice versa. So Theresa May tried to sort of have a deft or a subtle or a nuanced departure that she needed to negotiate. But anything that made the European bureaucrats happy was not going to go down and was not going to be approved by Parliament and so on. So Theresa May finally had to give up the fight and resigned as Prime Minister. The Tories, I don't want to say the Tory Party is the Conservative Party there. It's like the Republicans here. It's ostensibly conservative. It pretends to be conservative. It tries to get votes by being conservative, and genuine conservatives usually don't have anywhere else to go. But as it happened, she resigned, and in their parliamentary system, they didn't have to have a national election because the party's still in power if they select a new prime minister, and the new prime minister that they selected was Boris Johnson. Now, just completely apart, I'm offering this as an observer and not as a partisan, not as I'm not a cheerleader. I don't have any kind of pom-poms in hand for Boris Johnson, the man, but it does appear to me that he understands he understands how negotiations work. In other words, he has said he was elected with the commitment that he'd be happy to leave the European Union with a deal, a negotiated deal. But if there was no deal, then he was going to leave anyway, and leaving anyway is what has come to be called the hard Brexit. Now, we're dealing with national economies, the economies of, an entire continent, basically, the continent of Europe. And so you're dealing with millions of people, thousands of companies, lots of politics, and that means no matter what you do, somebody's going to get creamed. No matter what you do, it's going to be hard for somebody. You can't turn left without doing somebody in. You can't turn right. You can't walk down the street without that being bad for the pickle manufacturers or bad for the wheat growers or bad for, whoever. So you can't address this kind of thing with an anecdotal response. Well, my cousin is in pickle manufacturing, and he's saying that this is really terrible. We have to step back and look at the big picture. And I think that the big picture is going something like this. Boris Johnson knows that in order to negotiate, you've got to negotiate from a position where the other side needs something from you. When Theresa May was negotiating from a position of please let us go and give us pleasant terms, there was no reason for them to do so. There was no reason for them to um, to work with her, and so they didn't. Boris Johnson is saying, "I'm going to go regardless," and this is my my take as a fan of the Jeffersonian sentiment that government is best, which governs least. That government gets in the way, the least, which governs the least. What's going to happen is many sophisticated, educated, erudite, urbane voices are going to predict thunder, lightning, and blue ruin if there's a hard Brexit. This is going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. I tell you, it's going to be terrible. And then if it happens that way, I suspect that what you're going to see is an explosion of economic activity in Britain. In other words, you're going to find out that the layers of bureaucracy are not oil for the engine, but are a dead weight in the back of the truck that the engine's trying to pull. And so consequently, if you just got rid of all the European regulations, all the European extras, and just said, well, let's just walk free and head down the street with our hands in our pockets and our hat on the side of our head and whistling. If Britain does that, I suspect you're going to see a number. I suspect you're going to see an economic boom in Britain, and that means other countries in the European Union are going to look over at that and say something like, "Hey, what?" Now, this is not to say that that it's going to be sunshine and roses for absolutely everybody. It is to say that when you're dealing with nations and dealing with large economies and dealing with things of this magnitude, you have to step back and look at the big picture. And the big picture is this: the people who are running Europe are not the friends of the little guy. They're not the friends of the rank and file. I believe the British populace, being already semi-detached from Europe already, got fed up earlier than others have. But if this works, if the hard Brexit works, if the hard Brexit is something, if it doesn't end in total disaster, which I'm pretty confident it won't, then a lot of other people are going to start thinking the same way. Oh, where the will be God. So we come to our Martyology section. This is the place where we're going through the New Testament, looking at the different words, different Greek words that represent different sins. And we come to apostasia. And this word is used twice in the New Testament. In the first instance, it is of a sin alleged. That's in Acts 21:21, where it is said of Paul that he was teaching Jews to forsake or fall away from Moses. So if you look at apostasia, the English word apostasy is related to this. And apostasy is a falling away. Now, Paul wasn't really teaching people to fall away from Moses. He was preaching and teaching the fulfillment of what Moses prepared the way for and predicted. But he's not teaching a falling away from Moses, but he was most certainly teaching a falling away from a particular way of following Moses. And so that's what upset them. The allegation, however, was that he was encouraging apostasy, a falling away from the way and the law of Moses. In the second instance, Paul is predicting what will happen before the day of Christ arrives. He says it this way: "Let no man deceive you by any means." This is 2 Thessalonians 2:3. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first." There it is, a falling away first. "And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." So the falling away here is a forsaking that is general and visible, and will result in the manifestation of the man of sin. From the fact that this man of sin sets himself up to be worshipped in the temple of God, we may infer the nature of the sin, what it was that induced people to fall away. It is a falling away from true worship into a grotesque idolatry. The action of falling need not be horrendous in itself, but in this case, it's a falling away from the living God into the final death. It is a fall with no real bottom to it. When you start falling away in the final apostasy, you are in effect falling into the bottomless pit. It is the ultimate fall. God don't never change. So we're continuing with Plodcast episode 110, and the book I'm reviewing is this time, well, review is not the right word, but the book I'm commending to you is a book by Michael Bull, and the name of the book is Fed by Ravens. What this book is a collection of Michael Bull's tweets. This is the second volume of them. He had an earlier volume called Birds of the Air, and this one is Fed by Ravens. As it happens, I wrote the foreword to this book. Michael asked me to write the foreword, and which I was happy to do because Michael Bull is a pithy and engaging writer. Now, there's a mixed bag, or maybe two mixed bags in one sack. You know what I mean. So Michael Bull has a hermeneutic that I find he has a hermeneutical structuring device which is more or less opaque to me. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's getting at when he's often when he's pointing to some of the larger structuring themes in Scripture. But when it comes to insight at the sentence level or at the tweet level, he is masterful. And it's the kind of thing where it'd be really hard to not understand what he's getting at. So many of you readers might find his larger expositions of Scripture. Michael Bull is a graphic designer in Australia, and he writes books of theology on the side. A number of you might find his larger works of theological exposition a bit dense or rough, how do I understand this? But when you're working through his tweets, it's precisely the opposite. It's right there. It's not possible to misunderstand him when he's writing in that form. The other thing is Michael Bull is a ardent Baptist. I'm not using the word Baptist in a denominational sense, but a small b Baptist. He's an ardent Baptist, does not believe in paedobaptism at all. Not only does he not believe in it, he takes a great deal of umbrage at it. And not only does he take umbrage, whenever he takes umbrage, he also takes shots. So if you're a paedobaptist like I am, and you're reading and you get this book, expect to be popped in the mouth a number of times on your commitment to covenant baptism, and that's the way it is. But so he feels strongly about it, and I want to say God bless him. I like a man who wakes up in the morning knowing what he believes, and despite that, knowing that he's coming from that corner, I was still happy to write the foreword. He is. It's just good. You're basically, if you read through this book of tweets, Fed by Ravens, you will find yourself edified, instructed, and amused, and let's be honest, annoyed at various times, and that's what a good book is for. God don't never change. He's God.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.